She was my boss, married, untouchable. But the night she said, "Don't call me Mrs. After Hours," everything between us changed. I still remember the first day I walked into that office. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper, the kind of scent that clings to long hours and unspoken ambition. I was 24, still trying to convince myself that I belonged in places where the floors shone and the people spoke with certainty. Then she walked in. Mrs. Shah, my new boss. Early 40s, I guessed, though it was hard to put an age to her. She carried herself with a poise that made the room quieter the moment she entered. Her dark hair was swept into a neat twist, not a strand out of place. A fitted blazer in charcoal gray, heels that clicked softly on the tiles, and eyes that gave the impression she had already measured everyone and everything in the room. I told myself to look away, to treat her like anyone else. But it wasn't easy. There was something about her, the way she didn't need to demand respect, yet everyone gave it. Even I did, without thinking. Our first real interaction came late in the day. Most of the team had already left, their chairs standing empty like abandoned shells. I was still at my desk, typing with the kind of intensity only new hires have, desperate to prove myself. She appeared beside me so quietly I almost didn't notice. "You're still here," she said, her tone even, not unkind. I looked up. She was standing with one hand resting lightly on the edge of my desk, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, I caught a softness in her expression, a warmth that wasn't part of the polished image she wore during the day. "Yes," I said, stumbling a little. "Just finishing this report." She studied me for a moment, as if weighing whether my dedication was genuine or just for show. Then she nodded. "Good. But don't burn yourself out. The work will still be here tomorrow." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, and for a moment it felt less like a boss giving advice and more like something else. Something personal. When the clock finally dragged itself past 8, I packed up my things and walked toward the door. She was already there, slipping her blazer over her shoulders, keys in hand. Instinctively, I said, "Good night, Mrs. Shah." She stopped mid-motion. Her eyes met mine across the dim corridor, steady and unreadable at first. Then the corner of her mouth curved, just slightly. "After hours," she said softly. "Don't call me Mrs." The words lingered in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. It was a small thing, maybe even nothing at all. But to me, it felt like the opening of a door I hadn't realized existed. She turned and walked out into the night, heels echoing against the floor. I stood there, caught between confusion and something I couldn't name. And that was how it began. The office feels different at night. During the day, it's a hive of voices and footsteps, printers humming, phones ringing. But once the sun drops and the others leave, it becomes something else entirely, quiet, vast, almost intimate. That night, it was just the two of us. I stayed behind, still wrestling with a stubborn spreadsheet. From her office, I saw the warm glow of a desk lamp against glass walls, her silhouette moving in slow, thoughtful motions. Eventually, curiosity won over my hesitation. I walked past her open door. She wasn't the same woman I'd seen that morning. Her blazer was draped over the back of her chair, sleeves of her blouse rolled to her elbows, dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Without the armor of her usual composure, she seemed softer, more human. "You're still here too?" I asked quietly, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, and for a second her eyes seemed surprised, like she'd forgotten anyone else existed in the building. Then she smiled, faint and tired but real. "I lose track of time when I'm working. Bad habit." I stepped inside, careful not to seem intrusive. Papers were spread across her desk in organized chaos, notes written in neat, deliberate handwriting. A coffee cup sat forgotten at the corner, a thin film on the surface. "You should head home," she added. "You're young. Don't waste your nights buried in spreadsheets." I shrugged. "I could say the same to you." Her laugh came unexpectedly, low, warm, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in an office. It made me smile without meaning to. For a moment, she looked less like a married boss with an impeccable reputation and more like a woman caught in the same late-night trap as me. We worked in silence for a while, the steady rhythm of typing and paper shuffling filling the room. The city lights blinked outside the window, casting reflections that shimmered faintly across her face. Then it happened, something small, but enough to send my thoughts spiraling. I reached for a file just as she did. Our hands brushed, skin against skin for the briefest second. It should have meant nothing. But the warmth of her touch lingered, the weight of it more than it should have been. Her eyes flickered up to mine, and for that split second, there was no boss, no title, no Mrs. Anything. Just two people caught in the same late-night silence, aware of something neither of us dared to name. She was the first to pull away, clearing her throat softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sorry," she murmured, though she hadn't done anything wrong. I shook my head. "Don't be." The air felt heavier after that, charged in a way I hadn't experienced before. Every glance, every word carried an unspoken undertone. I wanted to stay in that room forever, caught in the quiet tension of not saying what we both felt. When she finally stood and began gathering her things, I realized how late it had gotten. She turned to me at the doorway, her voice softer than usual. "Good night," she said. I wanted to say her name, but instead, I only nodded. And when the door closed behind her, the room felt emptier than it had all day. The rain came without warning. By late evening, the office windows were streaked with silver lines, the city lights outside blurred behind the downpour. Most people had already left by then, rushing out before the storm caught them. But I stayed, partly because I had work, partly because I knew she was still there. Her door was open, the glow of her desk lamp spilling across the hallway. I found her near the window, blazer off, heels set neatly beside her chair. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her, one arm resting against the glass as she watched the rain pour down in sheets. Her hair had loosened throughout the day, falling gently across her face in a way I hadn't seen before. "You'll be here all night if you wait for that to stop," I said, stepping inside. She glanced at me, almost startled, before softening. "I don't mind. Sometimes I like the sound of it." Her voice was low, quieter than her usual office tone, as if the storm had drawn something gentler out of her. I sat in the chair opposite hers, though it felt less like employee and boss and more like company. The rain drummed steadily against the glass, a rhythm that seemed to close us off from the rest of the world. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that feels like an understanding. Her eyes stayed on the window, but her thoughts seemed far away. When she finally spoke, her words surprised me. "It's strange," she murmured. "People think I have everything. The career, the stability, the family life. But when I go home," her voice trailed, fragile in a way I had never heard from her before. "It feels quiet. Too quiet." I didn't know what to say. I had always seen her as untouchable, a figure who moved through the office with complete control. Hearing her admit to loneliness felt like seeing the cracks in marble. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. "I don't think anyone really is everything, even when it looks like they do." She turned toward me then, and for a moment her eyes locked onto mine, searching as if to check whether I meant it. There was vulnerability there, hidden beneath all the layers she wore during the day. And for the first time, she looked less like my boss and more like a woman sitting in front of me, confessing something she hadn't said aloud in a long time. The storm raged outside, but inside the office, the air felt still. Her shoulder brushed against my arm as she shifted closer to the window, and though it was the lightest touch, it sent a current through me. Neither of us moved away. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let her know she wasn't as alone as she believed. But instead, I just sat there, letting the silence say what words couldn't. The rain softened eventually, the sound fading to a gentle patter. She exhaled, almost as if she'd been holding her breath the entire time. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't the storm she hadn't wanted to face alone. The work trip wasn't supposed to mean anything. Just another presentation, another hotel, another night spent away from home. But somehow, the moment we stepped into that city, the air between us felt different, looser, as if the usual rules had been left behind in the office. Dinner was her idea. "We should eat properly after the day we've had," she said, though her tone carried more warmth than instruction. I agreed, of course. I would have agreed to anything. She chose a small restaurant tucked into a quiet street, far from the business district. It wasn't the kind of place where executives dined with colleagues. It was intimate, lit with soft lamps that left shadows dancing across the walls. When she arrived at the table, I nearly forgot how to breathe. She wasn't in her work armor. No blazer, no heels that echoed against tile. Instead, She wore a simple dress, dark and understated, with her hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time, she looked nothing like my boss. She looked like someone I wanted to know outside of titles, outside of everything. The conversation flowed more easily than it ever had in the office. She laughed, really laughed, at something I said, her hand brushing against mine briefly on the table before she pulled it back, almost too quickly. I could tell she noticed it too, because she reached for her wine glass immediately, her fingers trembling just enough for me to see. By the time we walked back to the hotel, the city lights glittered like scattered glass against the night sky. The air was cool, the streets damp from an earlier rain. We walked close, though not quite touching, the silence between us louder than any conversation could have been. When we reached her door, she paused, turning toward me. For the first time all day, she didn't look like the woman who commanded boardrooms. She looked uncertain, human. "Thank you," she said softly, "for tonight, for making it feel different." I wanted to ask what she meant. Different from her marriage? Different from her loneliness? But the words caught in my throat. Instead, she did something I didn't expect. Her hand lifted and came to rest lightly on my forearm. Just a touch, but deliberate, intentional. Her eyes stayed on mine, holding, searching. The weight of that small contact was enough to make my chest tighten. I almost called her Mrs. Shah, out of habit, but the sound of it caught before it escaped. She must have seen it in my eyes, because she whispered, almost like a plea, "Don't. Not tonight." The words pressed into me, heavy, electric. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't even a promise. It was an admission that what was happening between us wasn't just in my imagination. For a heartbeat, we stood at the edge of something neither of us could name. And then, just as quickly, she let go, slipping into her room with a soft, "Good night." The door clicked shut, but I stood there in the hallway, pulse racing, knowing a line had been blurred and could never be drawn quite the same again. After that night at the hotel, something changed. We didn't talk about it, but it lingered in the air between us, woven into every glance, every silence. She carried herself with the same composure, the same clipped tone in meetings, but I could see the distance in her eyes, like she was holding herself together with threads that could snap at any moment. I felt it too, the weight of restraint, the ache of almost. One late evening, I found her still in her office, lights spilling into the hallway. She sat stiffly at her desk, eyes fixed on a stack of papers she wasn't reading. Her pen tapped restlessly against the page, betraying the calm she wore like armor. "You've been avoiding me," I said gently, stepping inside. Her hand froze. Slowly, she set the pen down, but she didn't look at me. "I've been busy." "That's not what I meant." She inhaled, shoulders rising, then falling with the kind of weariness that comes from more than just work. When her eyes finally met mine, they were sharper than I'd ever seen them. "You don't understand what you're doing," she said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled as they folded together on the desk. I moved closer, careful, as if approaching something fragile. "Then explain it to me." Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She looked down, her gaze fixed on her hands. "You make me forget," she whispered at last. "Forget what?" "My age, my rules, my marriage, everything I've built to keep my life in order." She pressed her fingertips to her temple, shaking her head. "And that terrifies me." The room went still. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't move away. I leaned against her desk, lowering myself so I was at her level, so she couldn't hide from my eyes. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said quietly. "Not here. Not now." Her breath caught, shaky, and for the first time I saw her defenses falter completely. She looked at me as though torn between pulling me closer and pushing me away. I reached out, not boldly, but gently, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. My fingers lingered a fraction longer than necessary, and she closed her eyes, just briefly, as if memorizing the feeling. When she opened them again, they glistened, her voice breaking into a whisper. "You have no idea how dangerous this is." "Maybe I do," I said, "and maybe I don't care." Her hand twitched on the desk, as though she wanted to reach for mine, but couldn't quite let herself. The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. In that moment, the boundary between us was paper thin. One word, one movement, and it would shatter. But instead of crossing it, she drew in a sharp breath, pushing back in her chair, retreating into the shadow of restraint. "Go home," she said softly, though her voice cracked in a way that betrayed her. I hesitated, searching her face for something certain, but all I found was conflict, deep, human, and real. So I left. But as I walked out into the night, I knew something irreversible had happened. The truth was out. The line we had both tried to hold had already broken. The invitation came casually, almost offhand. She mentioned a small company bonding evening at her house that weekend, as though it were part of her professional duties. But when I arrived, it became clear no one else had been invited. Her home was nothing like the polished image she carried at the office. It was warm, lived in, filled with books stacked on side tables and family photos on the walls. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and wine. She stood in the kitchen barefoot, an apron tied loosely around her waist, hair falling in soft waves. For a moment, she looked nothing like my boss, and everything like a woman who had been waiting for someone to see her this way. "You cook too?" I teased as I stepped inside. She laughed, glancing over her shoulder. "Don't sound so surprised. I'm not all boardrooms and contracts." Dinner was simple: roasted vegetables, pasta, a bottle of wine between us. We sat at the dining table, talking about everything but work. She told me stories about her university days, the music she used to listen to, the places she once dreamed of traveling. Her eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before, and I realized how little of her life I had known, how much she had hidden behind her title. The wine softened our voices, loosened the silences. At one point, she leaned back, glass in hand, and said quietly, "Sometimes I wish I'd met you before my life became set." The words hung heavy between us. I didn't know what to say at first, so I let them settle, let them breathe. Finally, I whispered, "I think about that too." Her gaze dropped to the table, and when she looked up again, there was no shield in her expression. Just honesty, vulnerability. Later, we moved to the couch, plates left in the sink, music playing low in the background. She curled her legs beneath her, sitting close enough that our knees brushed. The small contact sent a current through me, and when I shifted slightly, our hands found each other as if drawn by gravity. Her fingers slipped into mine, warm and deliberate, and neither of us pulled away. We sat like that for a long time, her hand resting in mine, the quiet hum of music filling the space between words. Eventually, she leaned her head against my shoulder, her hair brushing lightly against my cheek. Her voice was soft, almost a confession. "You make me feel seen," she said. My chest tightened at the words, because I knew they weren't casual. They carried weight, the weight of years of being looked at but not truly noticed. I turned slightly, enough to see her face tilted toward me, eyes half closed, trust written in every line. I wanted to kiss her then, wanted to erase every distance still left between us. But instead, I just held her hand tighter, letting the moment remain tender, unbroken. The choice wasn't made with words or declarations. It was made in the quiet, in the way she didn't move away, in the way she let herself rest against me as though she had finally stopped fighting. And I knew, sitting there with her heartbeat pressed faintly against my arm, that something had shifted forever. By Monday morning, it was as if nothing had happened. She walked into the office in her sharp blazer, hair pinned back, heels clicking with precision. Her voice carried the same calm authority. Her eyes moved from person to person with practiced focus. To anyone watching, she was the same Mrs. Shaw she had always been, untouchable, composed, unshakable. But I knew better, because I had felt her hand slip into mine, her head lean against my shoulder, her voice confess in a whisper, "You make me feel seen." That memory lived under my skin now, humming like a quiet secret. Every time she passed my desk, every time her gaze flicked briefly to mine, I felt it again, the soft defiance of the choice we'd made without ever saying it out loud. The day dragged on with meetings, phone calls, numbers on screens. We played our roles perfectly, not once letting anyone suspect the truth. But in the in-between moments, when our paths crossed in the hallway, when she handed me a folder and her fingers brushed mine for a heartbeat too long, the air seemed to thrum with something no one else could hear. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I lingered at my desk, pretending to finish work. She emerged from her office with a stack of papers, pausing when she noticed me. For a moment, she looked like she might say something. Then she simply gave me the faintest smile and walked past, her perfume trailing lightly in the empty corridor. At the elevator, She hesitated. I saw it. The small pause, the way her shoulders stiffened, then softened. She turned slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to catch it. Her eyes meeting mine across the dim space, steady, unguarded. Nothing was spoken. Nothing needed to be. That night, as I walked home, my phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. Just a few words, but enough to make my chest tighten. Thank you for not calling me Mrs. I stared at it for a long time. The city lights blurred around me, the noise of the street fading to nothing. Because in those words was everything. Her acknowledgement of what we were, of what we weren't, of what we might never fully be. But also her gratitude. Her choice to let me exist in the part of her life where titles didn't matter. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this fragile, quiet thing between us can survive the weight of the world's judgment, or the complexity of her marriage, or the endless expectations pressing down on her. But I do know this. I know the warmth of her hand in mine, the sound of her laugh when she forgets herself, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against my shoulder. And for now, in this uncertain space between right and wrong, between titles and names, that is enough.